and it's 8:30 a.m. on Good Friday here in Melbourne. Welcome to the Supply Chain Bunker. Today we're going to be focusing on robotics, and we're going to be joined by Fresh Consulting Automation Director Marco Micheletti. Looking forward to that. He's got more than 20 years experience managing engineering teams, driving automation, product development, supply chain, manufacturing, and has worked on products like the Xbox 360, Nike's GPS watch and fuel band, Steam controller, and Steam VR kit. So hugely interesting background. Before we do that, I'm going to share some headlines, and then we're going to get a little bit of a insight into the kind of week Dave's been having. One of the big words that I'm seeing at the moment in headlines is the word pivot, and we're seeing a massive manufacturing pivot right now as companies set up to produce products needed to help with the crisis, frontline products and other stuff that's supporting that. And we're seeing some multi-million-dollar orders for very large companies. According to Bloomberg, I think yesterday there was a GM and Ventec contract to produce ventilators for almost $500 million.
Wow.
And it creates a partnership that's going to deliver 30,000 ventilators by the end of August, with at least 1/5 delivered before the 1st of June. The concern there is the timeline, really. How many ventilators are we going to have when we need them, and how many are we going to have as a stockpile when it's too late? There's been an amazing spirit of innovation and creativity to stand up new solutions recently. This needs a design approach that's somewhat different and reflects what's available in the market rather than the ideal solution. So designing for supply chain is suddenly top of mind and top of agenda. Making sure products can be delivered to where they need to be rather than just being the right product. So there's a lot of compression of that design process. Some interesting applications. Jacksonville Transport Authority have partnered with an autonomous vehicle mobility company, Beep and Navia, to transport COVID-19 tests from a drive-through testing site to their processing laboratory. So we're seeing those applications in AVs. And that's just one of examples of new technology stepping up. There are numerous examples of 3D printing coming to support urgent needs. Drones as a technology are becoming very interesting. They're finding a role in terms of monitoring populations, disinfecting public areas, delivering critical supplies, and even temperature checking using heat-sensitive sensors.
So cool.
More and more it is. It's really interesting to see those automation applications, and I think that's something we'll get into today with Marco. More and more companies asking how supply chains will change for the better to be more prepared for future disruptions. So we're kind of seeing a little bit of an evolution of that post-COVID-19 story, which I think is important. And the words that come out there are the combination of agility and resilience. How do we build both of those into supply chain, and what do those tools look like? And we've got a webinar coming up on healthcare, and I think the supply chains in there are very relevant to that, and that requirement for that resilience and that agility. And interestingly, there's a curious dividend, because manufacturing and travel disruptions have delivered this short-term climate benefit. And that might be significant because there was a Harvard survey out this week, or a Harvard study that came out that said air pollution prior to the outbreak could have impacted the morbidity rate by as much as 15%. So excessive particulates in our atmosphere leading up to the outbreak is quite possibly aggravating the situation. So any positive change in terms of air quality is going to be hugely valuable. Those are today's headlines. Meanwhile, I've been reading headlines about the face shield project in various different places. Dave, tell me a bit about how that's going and what else has been keeping you busy this week.
I can't believe that it's already been a week since our last one. It feels like it's been a month in some ways. Time, I think, is small businesses slow down during this period, and at the same time moving a mile a minute. So we're full speed ahead. I think, like you said, last week we launched a project to help build PPEs for frontline workers. This was based upon a lot of demand we had seen, and just inquiries say, how can we help? And so we spun up a full set of injection molding tools, both domestically in the US as well as in Asia and China, to help meet some of the demand that we saw 3D printers and hobbyists doing for face shield, but to do it at a professional scale. We've had over 1 million units requested already.
Wow.
We have more inquiries every single day. We've had folks from Mark Cuban's foundation to the Gates Foundation reach out to people on the East Coast. I mean, the demand has just been unbelievable. And I'm just so proud of the work of all of our Fictors to take our technology we built and apply it in this time of need. I think,
I think it's
go ahead.
Sorry, I think it's a great example of how you have circumvented. You know, if you'd said you're going to stand up a product of your own, 2 or 3 months ago, you would have put together a 4 or 5 month cycle. You would have gone out to beta testing. You would have had a focus group. There would have been a whole bunch of things. They've been circumvented by taking an open source design, improving that design, designing it for manufacture, designing it for available supply chain, available logistics, and getting it there fast.
We went in 10 days from idea to shipping the first 1,000 units, and the ability to do, now I think we're up to 10,000 units a day. That's our production capabilities. If you just think about that, like that is agility in supply chain. And so I think that with all the things, and I have a couple of things I wanted to hit on here, but in terms of news, but of all the things, like these are the great things that are coming out. It's great to see this type of work across Ford and what they've been doing. I'm a Ford alumni, you know, watching Tesla build ventilators out of Model 3 car parts. Like it's truly an extraordinary time for ingenuity and innovation. And it's really, really exciting. I think the flip side of that is, you know, for the folks in the US, this is a really hard time. So for people that are watching, you know, my thoughts and prayers go out to all the families, members, and communities around the US, where this week and next are going to be some of the hardest time in the last couple of decades in the United States. You know, we saw last week 6.6 million people lost their job, filed for unemployment in the United States, which is just jaw-dropping, and that number is expected to grow. PPE shortages across the board, you know, just is really putting a focus lens, I think, on supply chain, which is why we have everyone together here. And so one of my things to call out, I think a lot of folks are hitting the frontline workers in supply chain, talking about doctors and nurses, and that's great. But we have to remember that there's all these other people that have needs as well in supply chain, jails and prisons, First Nation reserves, community shelters. All of these people need PPEs. There's a great story out of Chicago where Cook County Jail, 238 inmates and 115 staff members were tested positive for COVID. Wow. And if you just think about that, this is a group of people that really need our help. And the problem is around supply chain. The problem is around access. And it's just such a shame that if we can solve supply chain and I think get everyone who's on this, who's watching this, how do we innovate here? That's really my call to arms today. We need to be innovating for thinking about what do we do in Q3 of this year, in Q4 of this year, 2021, like how are we going to change supply chains? Really pushing leaders to think about this. And so I think today I'm really excited to talk about robotics. And to be able to bring in experts to say how are robots gonna change our world here. And maybe the last thing that I'll give a plug out to, just to remind all the watchers, is this is meant to be interactive. So our hope is, Krista, thank you. She posted the first question, but use the chat window, ask a Q&A. We are so lucky to be able to have Marco on the show today and to be able to learn from him. So please let's interact. So Phil, I'll give it back to you.
No, and I think you make some great points there. And I'm, you know, when I kind of look at those parallels between the agility and the speed you were talking about in the project you've stood up and what we need in the future, what I really hope is we learn some lessons and we apply those lessons to create something that's much more resilient and much more agile and able to cope and able to help people faster in the future. Let's talk about robotics a bit more. Let's bring Micheletti in from Fresh Consulting. Michael, please join us. I gave a short introduction to you at the top of the show. If there's anything else you want to add to that, go ahead and do so. But really, we want to kick off with, once you've done that, with the role of robotics right on the front line. What are robots delivering? What are they able to do right now?
Yeah, and thanks, Dave, and thanks, Phil, for having me. And the background there, yeah, was pretty good. I've spent basically a lot of time in supply chain, manufacturing, product development, kind of end to end. In the last good chunk of time, I've been focused on, coming up and figuring out ways around manufacturing and automation and robotics on how to, lean into this agility that you're talking about and help make things faster and better and higher quality. And that's one of the traditional ways that robotics helps us in our day-to-day manufacturing and supply chain places. But it's really starting to open our eyes as to what the needs are and where and interesting functions that robotics are really starting to play, in the situation that we're at today. Traditionally robotics and automation have been very fixed and expensive, and they stay in one place and they do one thing, and all of a sudden the cost is coming down, which allows us to use them in different areas and allows us to come up with new and novel applications. And then real innovation really starts happening when you join other technologies along with them. And so as we look at how robotics might play a part in the medical space, obviously they're this distancing and buffer type of technology, which you never really thought about a robot being there. You thought about it as this device that did something.
I think about like the Jetsons, right? It's just, running around with a robot serving me food every day, right?
Right. Pick up the socks or whatever. And so, that there's this mindset of these are the very traditional things that robotics are good for and can do. And how do I figure out how to, flip a beer to me when I'm in my sofa? And that's not what we're talking about these days. There are real solutions, real applications to go after here. And robots are really interesting just in the context when you start talking about social distancing. They're really good at that.
Maybe I can steal your framework, and Phil, I'll take the first question, where I love this idea of how you describe the 3Ds that are the role of a robot. Maybe you can share a little bit more around that, and I love this framework.
Yeah, and this is traditional. This isn't mine, but it's, robots are great in places where there's work to be done that's dull, dangerous, or dirty. And those are just very, very traditional, great places to start looking for automated and robotic type solutions. And all of a sudden our definition of what kind of dangerous is in terms of viruses has expanded beyond just the lab and the hospital environment. It's around us now every day. And so just one really specific area is when you start looking at last mile deliveries and applications like that. All of a sudden you're like, oh, I get why all these folks have been focusing on robotic type delivery solutions, and all of a sudden it's very pertinent these days.
So let's take that last mile solution. I think why do you think that has been able to be built in maybe the last 5 years, or maybe talk to me either on the product development or what you've seen kind of throughout your career and how that's changed either from a supply chain, a manufacturability. It just seems like robotics are more prevalent in many different niche solutions than ever before.
It's the combination again. It's the combination of, in the supply chain of logistics solutions of, hey, we have a robot all of a sudden that can, we don't need to buffer up huge amounts of material all over the globe. We can put it locally in smaller amounts. And so in logistics, it's the combination with, AI and machine learning, and how do we position materials closer to where people need them so that they can get them more quickly. Those are two in the supply chain, like the things that Walmart and Amazon do in that space, they really lead the way. That's just one very innovative and disruptive way that we get our products to us every day. And it's become the expectation. And so when we apply that to the way, traditional electronics or products are made overseas all of a sudden, and we have a situation like this, that process breaks down. And so now we have a model and a roadmap to go and look out how we're going to speed delivery of critical care items and PPEs and medicine and testing kits and get them into people's hands where they need them quickly.
Yeah. Marco, have you seen specific examples where you've just thought, wow, that's a perfect application for robotics? And has the industry responded to that and delivered specific solutions? Are there examples out there where people have really hit the road running?
There's a few examples that we've worked on at Fresh, and I've seen just anecdotally, pretty much anywhere we've seen time and time again, when there's a bring something from point A to point B, and you have a person involved in that situation, and the person isn't adding a lot of value, and it's a dull job, it's repetitive. There's better uses for people doing higher value work, solving greater problems, and that's just a standard use case. And so we look at large and small applications, from installing solar panels in a 1,500 acre solar farm, delivering solar panels back and forth to the workers who are doing the precision working operation of applying them to set them up. We see the same thing. I never was really convinced about, food delivery service robots, but all of a sudden, boy, they sure make a lot of sense. And I think we've really found the use case, and we're going to start seeing the acceleration of robots in a lot of these places where they seem maybe niche or maybe slightly frivolous. Maybe that's the wrong word. I'm sorry if I offend anybody there, but today it makes all the sense in the world, and I'll be the first to change my mind about that.
I think, Phil, we see the same thing in our world too, where I love this concept, Marco, you talk about, of like the precision work done by the human, and then this dull work done by machine. And so I think it's actually a really strong trend that how can we drive more automation in different processes where you're using this automation that's human plus machine. So whether it is solar panels being delivered in a hospital, you deliver the drugs, but a human still administers them. In the industrial setting, we call these cobots, right? Where it's humans working alongside of a robot to do heavy lifting, but maybe the final precision work is being done. It's amazing the amount of solutions that have been created, I think, to enable this. And we've seen from the supply chain side, just it's been amazing to see how many different industry solutions kind of come together as you build some of these. So if you're going to be Amazon that's building Scout or all these food delivery, they're borrowing navigation from automotive. They are taking sensors that LiDAR came from defense and missiles to start, and then they're delivering something that's a consumer application, so I can get a fresh burrito in California, which is just this amazing setting.
And that's bringing together all those ingredient technologies. Every time I go to CES and they present at the beginning to the media, they present the ingredient technologies that they think are key. And, artificial intelligence is always up there. Robotics is always there, and automation is there for that reason. But it's always, with robotics, it needs to be that human partnership. It needs to be taking us into this augmented age where we can achieve more with robotics, not be replaced by robotics. Because whenever I go to CES, I always come away thinking, wow, we're working so hard to mimic what humans can do. Humans are actually freaking awesome in terms of being able to do really complicated tasks and being able to receive huge amounts of information from lots of different places. So that augmentation is really important. And right now it's even more important because there are tasks that a doctor needs to do where he needs to deal with a lot of complex parameters, but the delivery or the interaction with the patient can be done remotely thanks to some robotic solutions. Is that something you're seeing, Marco, in the way people are thinking about this problem?
Yeah, that's right on. Again, robots tended to be like stationary and really fixed, and all of a sudden they're smaller, they're more agile. They can be more adaptable, but they're always, typically, like you said, they're elevating the human, or they're taking away distractions that you don't need to worry about, and making folks and able to deliver either more precise, more valuable work, just as a general trend. The fact that they're smaller and more adaptable, these like cobots specifically, now we can use them in more places, and we can all of a sudden, where it was maybe cost prohibitive or size prohibitive, space prohibitive, all of a sudden we can be very creative with these. And then they're not just doing one thing anymore. They're very functional, and like today it can be doing this, tomorrow it can be doing something else. We can even go, one of the trends I see is, again, taking a traditional manufacturing application solution, you build a manufacturing line, you build a fixed test station, or you build a purpose-built piece of equipment, and then you scale it across the line. You think about Apple, like, how many thousands of the same test stations they have to scale. All of a sudden, and maybe it's necessary for that type of business, but all of a sudden someone says, well, we can do the same thing, but I can just buy one or two, and I can take that sensor, put it on a drone. I can put it on a robotic platform, and now I can go across territory, distance, or multiple lines even in a factory, and be much more flexible. I can do 3 or 4 different tests, and the robot can survey and audit on a fixed basis. And so that's the type of creativity, and it's happening more and more faster, and that type of innovation is accelerating.
So maybe we can dive into that. I think, like with Fresh specifically, Marco, like how do you guys go about, like what does a typical engagement look like with you guys? Or maybe just tell me a little bit more how you think about the engineering side of building some of these platforms, just to help give some context there.
Yeah, it's very traditional from a product development standpoint, where you're trying to solve, someone comes to you with a problem to solve, and they're usually these fairly big, the audacious, hard, no one else has figured it out. So they're always kind of novel. They have a trick or a challenge or technology or just obstacles that are not obvious to figure out. And so, at Fresh, we do a lot of early engagements and thinking about an ideation and involving a lot of our team members. And often we'll do, a very small exploratory phase, just to be able to scope the problem appropriately, understand the space we're in. And that's typical for a typical approach for when you don't know what the solution is exactly going to be. It's great when people come and they say, I want X, Y, Z. You think about it, and sometimes you still ideate and go, well, have you thought about this? What about this alternative? And sometimes you hit, that's really what we want.
Give me that, yeah.
But we work with our clients to really help develop and figure out what it is they need, find the right solutions. Another trend that I see in robotics, and something that we're big on, is we need to do a better job of finding scalable solutions, and not just reinvent the same thing over and over and over again, and spending valuable time and resources on problems that have been solved. And so we focus a lot on a navigation solution that we have as a scalable solution. And whether it's, we work with partners and we're fairly technology agnostic, we want to find the right solution, but we also want to bring value and say, here's a solution something we figured out, a piece of the puzzle. Let's go work now on the really valuable part, whatever the novel and new problem is.
Let's talk about that then. Like, maybe tell me a little bit more about the navigation solution. And I think navigation is so key in robotics. So what does that consist of, and how do you break down navigation in robotics specifically?
Well, there's a number of sensors that we could use, and so we've developed a development platform project that has taken the things like you mentioned, like whether it's GPS, LiDAR, just inertial measurements, encoding, SLAM, vision-based technologies, and a number of other types of localization techniques. And we've been able to create a platform where we do all those sensor fusion and are able to figure out, we can do all the things essentially. And then as we have a technology or a solution that we're taking and developing with a client, we can figure out which are the right ones. It's never usually just one or two. It's a combination. Because navigation is generally one of the harder problems in robotics, but people have been spending a lot of time on it. And so we're getting to a particular level of maturity in that space where we don't need to focus on solving that problem every time.
Yeah, just kind of take it out of the box. Why don't you go ahead, Phil?
Yeah, no, I was curious, you were talking a lot about the whole engineering process, and it's a very refined engineering process. When we look at the current situation, it's a really simple question. How do we go faster? How do you circumvent that? How do you get a product out that's going to fit a solution right now?
Yeah, and you're trying to integrate. So we have some of the partnerships in place. Folks like Fictiv who can turn the platform's amazing for turning parts quickly. We've worked with a number of different technologies, and so we have a lot of the partnerships in place. We personally, if you're talking about how does Fresh go faster, we have a lot of internal capability to build ourselves, and again, working through a network of partnerships and using our expertise and experience in integrating these different solutions. So we have a bit of technology, we have a bit of a head start that we can leverage. Industry in general, I think that as we talk about the shifts in the supply chains and manufacturing and the role of robotics, this is a longer term shift that we're going to have to navigate. We're at the very beginning right now, and again, these trends will accelerate, and it'll be by it's unfortunate that it's by need, and so we're going to come out of this on the other side possibly a bit more robust.
And on that topic, we've had a question in from the audience about that. Do you see there being automation haves and have-nots at the moment? Are there companies that are suffering because they don't have the right level of automation in their logistics? And what are the pain points they're feeling?
Suffering, I'm not sure. I think a lot of people would like to have it, and a lot of people love the idea, but it's been again, traditionally, I've seen this, it's a tough investment. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, some of these projects are large, long time frame development. And so, I agree. There are the haves and the have-nots. I've been very lucky to work with some of the haves that have been able to develop some of these solutions. And the trick is, how do we work with the smaller folks to accelerate their development? How do we accelerate their the output of manufacturing to make more PPEs, to make more ventilator parts? And so, part of it is these great new technologies like 3D printing and faster controlled CNC automated type, again, combinations of communication platforms and equipment.
Well, let me ask you one of those halves where the automation worked really well. I know it's from a little while ago, but I love the Valve story of this software company. And you and I talked a lot about this, that, for Valve, for folks that don't know, one of the largest gaming platforms, it's a software company. And they woke up one day and they said, we're going to make a controller. Like, we're going to do this from the ground up. And so, and I think you guys were pretty ambitious with the amount of automation that you put into that project. Like, what was that like, even though it's a couple of years back, but, how did you guys approach, an automated solution with partners like Flex and other people at that time?
Yeah, it wasn't, I can guarantee I wasn't there at the beginning or the inception, and I can guarantee it wasn't just somebody woke up one day, but there was a lot of thought and consideration and by the team. And it's something I've, referred to in the past and maybe asked you guys on previous webinars is, there's this TCO stack of what's your total cost of ownership. And you have what the parts cost and what the lead time, but you have all these other considerations around, sending your design and development team over to Asia for weeks on, the time away, and they're dealing with factory issues, not designing or whatever their most valuable contribution might be. There's even, in these days, there are a lot of reasons on the bottom of that list that, every 2, 3, 5 years, something happens and you think about those items on the bottom of the list. And sometimes it's, tariffs, and sometimes it's a factory gets flooded, or sometimes, unfortunately, a factory is damaged, or there's
down,
disruption.
Whatever.
And so some of those things weighed a little higher on the in the mindset of why that project went the direction it was. And so we said, the idea was set that we're going to do this in North America for a variety of reasons, and they valued those reasons much higher than maybe the part cost and lead time. And we wanted to be flexible and being able to adapt to delivery to our customers and provide good service that way. And so those were some of the external thinking around it, and it was a monumental project to, and it was still a really small team to develop a product, develop the automation, and then launch it with a partner like Flex and the automation folks as well that we worked with, which were really great.
And I love this idea that you have of TCOs, like this total cost of ownership. Do you have a structured way that you think about that now with clients? Like, how do you push people to say, like, you need to think about TCO this way? How do you go about that?
That's right. Yeah. It's one of those things that you get dusts off every once in a while, and you start with your part cost, and you think about, how long does it take something to transit the ocean? And that's because things are typically being made offshore. And then we start talking about, another big thing, especially with startups, is just, buying the inventory and sitting on it and cash flow. That's just huge, especially for smaller companies. So again, having your production close to your customers is really important, and that's probably next on that stack. We've, gone through, and I've lived through MLCC shortages and again, factories flooding and plastic plants blowing up. And these things happen it's like every 1-2 years, something.
It's surprisingly high in supply chain, right? You're like, there's no way this could all go wrong.
Yeah. And so then, we have, geopolitical, everyone always just says geopolitical, and then you have to expand on it because, boy, it means a lot of different things these days. And so, these are all things that we talk about, where are your critical components coming from? How do you remain agile, but also have some redundancy? And you have to just be very purposeful, as you go through that list. So yes, there is a framework. It consists of elements like that. I'm going to probably do a little bit more blogging about these as well in the future.
Oh, it's great. I would love it. I think you're an expert on supply chain meets the engineering side, and I love this concept. Go ahead, Phil.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that whole thing of TCO, total cost of ownership, but also those hidden costs, and what we're seeing with any disruption, and what we're seeing particularly with this disruption, is specific issues coming to the fore and coming back onto the agenda. And I think the hope is that they become part of a transformation that needs to occur, and it's a transformation that needs to occur in the way that the supply chain's automated itself and the way that automation operates. And we've had a couple more questions come in from the audience around that. One of the questions and one of the terms that I think is really interesting is this idea of automating automation, and this idea that there
double entendre, or I'm not.
Yeah, well, not quite sure, but it's this idea that you can take technology, robotic technology, and use it in different applications. But how do you control the controllers, kind of thing? How do you manage the managers, and how do you create that agile, flexible automation, particularly in a manufacturing or supply chain environment? And is that something we're seeing more?
I'll take the first stab at it, then Marco, I'll give it to you. I think that repeatability is so key when you think about automating automation, if you will, because you're basically taking a process which already works pretty well, and you're looking to automate that further. And I think we've seen cases where companies try to jump too far ahead, like even in supply chain too, where they almost add too much complexity too early on, and that can be detrimental. In the same way that I think if you don't try to look around the corner, I think like you were saying, Marco, in supply chain, where you're looking at where geopolitical could hurt you or these kind of things, then then you're kind of stuck because you haven't tried to automate, if you will. And I think there's a lot of great solutions, but we really push companies on our side, I think, to think about make it repeatable first and de-risk that set of designs. Then you can run. Don't try and run right away. Like, go de-risk your design before you can push out. And I think that there's a lot of examples we could talk about there. I don't know if it's true in your world as well, Marco.
It's definitely true. I've lived that life. You want to kind of automate in the right amount, and going too far locks you in often before your design is mature. When I think about automating the automation, I think about the data systems that live on top of the automation, because those are getting, the AIs and the MLs that are starting to
getting better, smarter,
and be more proactive in identifying when that consistency and that is shifting, and there's a lot of great tools out there that I see a lot of value starting to happen, a lot of movement and speed also in that area. And so all of a sudden that enables your design cycles to actually be very reactive and to be able to adapt quicker.
And I think that's,
go ahead.
Sorry, go. No, I was going to say, I think that's huge, and that plays into another question, because when you talk about those layers of intelligence or software on top of the automation that's actually making it more adaptable, is that where the real value is? One of the questions we've had is, are the arms and the basic tools of automation actually quite commoditized, and the real value add surely comes in the way that's applied and the way it's configured and the intelligence that sits on top of that.
Well, I think, Marco, you've seen some of that, right? Like, the building blocks of robotics have never been higher, whether you're using ROS as like your core language on there, or you get to use a universal robotic arm and you get to just start with that. Sounds like you guys have built some building blocks too, to build this foundation. Is that right?
On the autonomous navigation front, that's right. Yeah, we have like ROS operating system for controlling all these inputs and directing in the robot. Sorry, going back, I'm trying to think about the start of the question a little bit.
Just on like the building blocks to help drive automation. It's almost like what have you seen to bring the barriers down to maybe doing some of these robotic solutions?
I mean, first and foremost, I think is, there's a ton of accessibility, and again, the market is, I would say, introduced the idea that, hey, we have a lot of innovation going on. There's a lot of people solving a lot of different problems. And so there's a lot of solutions coming to market, and there isn't quite this standardization, but we're kind of getting there. So we have this highly fragmented market. But just by the sheer number of people working on different problems, all of a sudden these great solutions are bubbling up, and whether they're open source or solutions that you can buy off the shelf, all of a sudden, hey, there's a robotics shelf now that you can kind of go shopping and get the pieces you need.
Well, I'd love to, there's a question that came in that I'd love to ask specifically on that. Like, what are some of these either local or national channels, that you would push people to? Like, what are some of these good resources, maybe for finding some of these solutions?
There's a few I'm familiar with, and maybe not as many as I would like, but one of my colleagues has been around the country and had access to a few of these, like the Mass Robotics, and there's some great regional Silicon Valley robotics. We've been involved, and there are some initiatives locally in the Northwest, whether they're being spearheaded with the University of Washington. We have a very local organization that we work a bit with that is focused on serving the local manufacturing base in the Puget Sound. It's called CAMPS, the Center for Advanced Manufacturing in Puget Sound. And
like CAMPS.
That's right. Yeah. And we work with them and want to be able to help and elevate the conversation around robotics with those constituent members. And I think there's some things in the future that we'll be doing more around that.
Do you think there's an opportunity to take basically like Mass Robotics, CAMPS, we have Silicon Valley Robotics, SVR down here, and like nationalize this in some ways? Like, what are you seeing in your world for how we can actually get more robotics companies, to talk to each other and think together?
Well, exactly. Like formation of these industry groups. At least get folks together. Start the conversation, and let's start regionally. I know that there was also the Advanced Robotics and Manufacturing Institute that was set up by a governmental institute, and so there's been a few efforts with the National Science Foundation I've seen. There isn't quite a huge governmental push that I've seen personally, and not to say that there aren't folks out there, but they're more and more, and I think the voices are becoming a little louder. And eventually, once we have a critical mass in different regions, we'll be able to have at least some regional standardization, some regional standards and events, and be able to then take that up to a national platform.
Phil,
so quick question there, Marco. No, quick question there. How do you get people together when you can't get people together? That's one of my questions. But also, I think it's really important right now for associations or groups to kind of step up and create some collaboration. So they can connect maybe the innovation with some of the kind of frontline needs. So two questions: how do people get together?
My answer is really simple there. I mean, we're really adaptable. We're using technology better every day, and that's just I'm a little old fashioned and just trying to get folks on.
You want to go to the robot block party and do all those kind of things, and they're absolutely great. I've been to lots of those events. So the second part of my question is those organizations, are they kind of bringing like-minded people together to solve some of the issues that are out there?
They are, yeah. And I think some of them are still fledgling, but and the ones in our region as well. And again, I think Fresh is going to try to take a leadership position, hopefully in this conversation. And I'm going to save that for another day because, there's some of that we're going to have that'll be ready to talk about it. But I have seen and been involved with some of these organizations at a level, and they are talking more and more. And they start where they can. I know that camps started a long time ago with just trying to sponsor FIRST robotics and kids in high school, and just trying to start that way. And it starts at the grassroots and with the kids, and that's what they thought that they could do. And so everyone's just trying, and we'll get there and we'll grow. And it's a bit of a it's been a bit of a grassroots and organic type of growth, but we'll start coalescing again, get these regional centers of excellence and momentum.
I think you're so right that there's so much work to be done on the awareness side. Like you're saying, like if you start early, like a FIRST Robotics, that helps grow it up. We're a sponsor every year of at MIT of their FSAE, which is their electric car program, where they build an electric race car from the ground up and races on a track. There's so much robotics work that goes into that. I think what some of these groups have done to help do it, we need more, that there's so much hardcore applications that robotics could do with more investment. I think more work being done that we can apply navigation systems to. We can apply, off the shelf to really accelerate, I think, a lot of the R&D. So I couldn't agree more, Mark. I just wanted to plus one.
Yeah, no, I think that whole move from the stuff that's going on in schools, that's great. That gets people connected, and then all the hobbyist opportunities that there are around robotics and that you see at these different robotic events. I'm interested in what the kind of the path through that is, and if there's a solid structure that if somebody's great at the robotics competition and becomes a hobbyist, can they get into serious robotics and become part of that ecosystem?
Yeah, I don't have the answer for that, or I'm not, I guess, my strength may not be in, organizing the community as much as I'd like to around this, but there are people out there thinking about it.
Yeah.
And
I got a simple answer for you, Phil. My favorite example, so everyone watching this, you got to go check it out. It's called the Simple Beer Service. So This is how you get people together. AWS built this thing called the Simple Beer Service, and it's all on how you automate a pour out of a kegerator, and it teaches you how to do all this different stuff on. It's a bit of a plug for AWS and Amazon for their robotics platform, but it's also like I think beer, some circuit boards, and some robotics, you get that together. And I think most people want to come learn about robotics then. I don't know what gets much better than that.
Yeah, only good stuff can come from that.
Yeah, exactly. I think the best
brings all the
idea.
right people together.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know how we're going to do that in a post-COVID age, but maybe we'll all have to build our own beer tap services at home or something.
Yeah, I mean, there's this bottoms up, that's happening, and that's great. The kids are learning younger, and there's these great programs that, the colleges and universities are adapting. And I've seen, big industry and solution, that the solutions, not just robotics and automation, I've seen it in other areas of technology. Prices have coming down. So, whether we're faster, better, in the manufacturing space, but all of a sudden, that price point coming down orders of magnitude is a great thing for increasing exposure. And all of a sudden, every kid has a 3D printer in their basement, in their garage, and they're going to have, maybe simple cobots. My son made essentially a cobot out of cardboard and rubber bands and stamps at summer camp 2 years ago. And like, that's fundamentally a robot. It was human powered, but it was great. It could fix things. It was amazing.
Yeah, and it's key to that kind of development process to see what actually can be done. Interestingly enough, we had a couple of things in the chat box on events. There's a regular event put on by Silicon Valley Robots, and they also have a Bots and Beer event. So yeah, you're dead right. What you asked, Dave, about it being how do we do that in a post-COVID world? We could all have a beer here, I guess, but that would be a little bit early in the day. But let's move on to that post-COVID world. What do you see as the real drivers on the other side, Marco, in terms of automation? What do you see as being the real burning needs that people are going to want to resolve after the crisis?
I think, bringing products, especially in the medical space, to market quicker. I think that we're going to need to take a good hard look at our supply chains and look at them as strategic resources across all kinds of different sectors. The things that come to mind for me is we in this COVID world is our food safety and the agricultural chain. And again, I know the point of a lot of farmers, there's a lot of pain in finding the labor to process. And again, that's kind of a bit of a dull and dirty. And introducing robots where we can reduce human touch where you don't need it, and maybe that's safer and is better for us overall. I don't know, but I think that we start looking at different supply chains as a very strategic resource. And I know that some industries do, like power and energy, and how do we use robots to make sure that we have the power grid up and working, or expanding with natural resources, and being able to develop resources faster and more efficiently in a greener world. I think that those are a couple opportunities for folks to really, again, think about supply chains being highly strategic and highly important. And where you think about, where does your food come from? Where does your electricity come from?
Yeah. And then when we think about it in terms of manufacturing, for example, one of the things there is that products are currently designed for the manufacturing model we have. Do we need to change some of the product design fundamentals, the design for automated manufacturing?
Yeah, I think the additive industry for certain has been a game changer for the last 5-10 years, and I'm not super deep in that, but the things that it's enabling are amazing. When we can basically print any piece we have now all of a sudden, and all of a sudden we have a network that can combine everybody and use all this idle capacity and print very high tolerance, either metal parts and carbon fiber parts, and even the plastic materials are getting better and stronger. That's just one thing where we could build, we have to change our design approach a little bit, but all of a sudden we're extremely adaptable, and we're shortening our development cycles as well, just with those technologies, and that people have seen that, easily for the last 10 years.
Yeah, I think that's a great one to call out, to think about almost how do you shorten these cycles. So you're building robotics to drive efficiencies in there, but also shortening your development cycles to get to market faster, de-risk, some decision that you're making. One of the questions that came in here is, how do you guys think about like a good operating metric or, KPI as you're building robotics? Like when you're working with customers, how do you say if it's a good place to put robots in or not? Are there principles for how you approach this from a consulting perspective?
Yeah, there's definitely just general ROI type metrics that I follow, a methodology that's fixed on just determining, can we take the right amount of, essentially cost or time or whatever. I mean, money can be easily equated to time.
Yeah.
So can we hit achievable output? That just our takt times and cycle times increase. Those are very simplistic. From a does it make sense to automate standpoint. So yeah, there is a methodology there that we use and tools that we use to just determine the feasibility up front. From operations standpoint, you want to have your robots and your automation up and running all the time. And so, there's not necessarily one key metric, because for anybody's application, what's important to you, it could be uptime. And without knowing the operations, it's hard to know. But generally, you think of, is the machine available and able to do the task requested when it's requested, and do you have all the materials in place, or is it in the right position to do what you need, and or is it broken down, right? And those are kind of your three typical things you put together to make an OEE, an operational metric for any type of device. But it makes me think about also the with robots and additional technologies, sensor technologies, and different light wavelengths, and some of the things we're thinking about is you can now apply robotics, especially if you have some kind of autonomous systems, at night when people aren't working, and all of a sudden they're doing a dirty job without people around, and so all of a sudden they're increasing your output, right? We're using our resources more wisely and getting more out of our land or more out of a given resource, because we don't have to hire staff or work people around the clock or in inclement weather.
Yeah. Just before we go to wrap up and some takeaways, one of the things that I was curious in that discussion was the OPEX to CAPEX argument. And when you're looking at robotics, are you seeing much in terms of this trend towards robotics as a service, where, people can literally hire a robot to do a task? When that task is no longer required, they can either send back the robot, or thanks to some software automation, it can be redeployed elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a barrier, and something we didn't talk about in the haves and have-nots. And we need to come up with models, essentially robotics as a service, and can we call out the purpose-built robot and share it, and is it a shared resources? Or is it a different kind of model, just from a costing standpoint, where you're not fronting the bill up front and you're in a pay per use? And that's something we've done a little bit of thinking on, but you're right. And I think it's a need that we need to think about a little bit more of this robotics as a service.
Yeah, I think the disruptive business models there are really valid.
Yeah.
As we move into that. So what I'd like to do in the last 5 minutes is just kind of figure out what the wrap-ups are, what the takeaways are, what we can send our viewers home with, and what they really need to think about. I don't know who wants to take it first.
Well,
Dave,
I'll take the first one. I think my favorite quote might have been from you, Phil, that humans are freaking awesome. So I think that if I get to have a conversation about robots, and what I take away is humans are freaking awesome, I couldn't agree more. I think, Marco, some of the stuff that I learned that I just love is this concept of adaptability in robotics. Like how do you shift things, and applying total cost of ownership to to adaptability, whether we build or not. And definitely a framework I'm going to start bucketing more as those 3Ds. I think of the dull, dirty, dangerous, and saying, how do we help simplify some of the solutions people are building to say, well, what are you really trying to solve there? I think those are some great frameworks from a robotics and how we approach supply chain for them. So thanks for sharing those with me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, and I think just to, like Phil said, people are so adaptable, and they're good at really precise and high value and ambiguous situations. And it's this, I like to think of this as robotics and automation help elevate people, and they help people. We're not taking jobs away. We're letting them focus on more valuable things and saving lives and things like that. So we're really, using robotics for the right things. And again, just as a takeaway, this last point we were talking about, I think we need to look at, again, the strategic protection of these different supply chains and really think about that, whether it's just, manufacturing or across different industries. How do we get materials from point A to the end user? And be close and flexible, and adding on top of that, the logistics and the AI and the things that you can do to help speed that, as well as the producing, but getting it to people is a huge opportunity.
Yeah, and I think when you talk about, and it's again this human interaction thing, when you talk about those things, it's identifying the right solution, isn't it? Don't chase the wrong automation. Figure out what the right automation is and do that. And again, every time I go to CES, I wander around Eureka Park and think, yeah, I'm not quite sure why you're doing that. But that's always my first question. It's not what can we do. It's kind of why are we doing it? No. But I think for me, some of the key takeaways are around the opportunities that robotics has to help in the current situation, and that's very tangible, and that's very right now, because that ability to create distance is huge. People are awesome, so collaboration is absolutely key, whether it's collaborative robots, but that idea of augmenting is really huge. The fact that we have to shorten development cycles now is really big, and using what you have to do that, whether that's digital building blocks like robotics and machine learning and all those things, or whether it's just as simple as this is what's available in the supply chain, this is what we need to design to. So I think those are really important. But clearly we're going to see a big trend in more automation, more digital transformation as we get to the kind of tail end of this crisis. And the important thing is to learn from everything we've done during that crisis. So, we talked at the very beginning, Dave, about agility and the speed at which you've stood up new products. Let's really embrace that and kind of take that forward as a mantra for products that just need to be fast because they're valuable to get out there.
Couldn't agree more. And on that note, just one more big thank you to you, Marco, for being our expert and teaching me today.
Thank you.
Really learned a lot and appreciate it. And,
absolutely, pleasure's mine.
And to everyone else out there, be safe. It's a crazy time in the world, and so thoughts and prayers go out to everyone's families, and keep the social distancing up, everyone. So
yeah, that's right.
Birds
are changing. Yes,
thank
in
you.
the right direction.
Right on.
See you next time in the
be well, be safe. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Yep. Bye.
All right. Bye.